The rain came down in heavy, slanted sheets, soaking the cracked pavement and turning the empty streets into long, silver rivers. 14-year-old Evan Carter ran through it with his hood pulled low, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles as if the storm itself was chasing him. Behind him, the orphanage lights still glowed like cold, watchful eyes. That place was supposed to be safe. That's what the sign out front said. Riverside Children's Home. But inside it was anything but. The walls smelled like bleach and old anger. The staff yelled more than they listened. And the older boys learned fast that if you wanted to survive, you had to be meaner than everyone else. Evan had tried not to be. He was quiet, gentle, and stubbornly hopeful in a place that punished kindness. Tonight, it finally broke him. It started when one of the supervisors grabbed him by the arm, accusing him of stealing extra bread from the kitchen. Evan hadn't done it, but nobody cared. They never did. A shove, a hard grip, a warning whispered too close to his ear. Next time it won't be just a warning. So Evan ran. He slipped out a side door during dinner, his heart pounding like a trapped animal. His only belongings were stuffed into a ripped backpack, 2 t-shirts, a hoodie, a paperback novel with half the pages missing, and a few crumpled bills he'd saved from doing chores in town. Now he was out in the world, soaked, cold, and terrified. But also free. The wind cut through him, sharp and relentless. But Evan kept going. He crossed empty fields, ducked under sagging fences, and followed a dirt road that led nowhere in particular. His legs burned. His lungs ached. Still, he didn't stop. Because stopping meant going back. Hours later, just when exhaustion was turning his steps clumsy and slow, Evan saw it through the mist. A cluster of dark shapes rising from the trees. A house, a barn, a fence half swallowed by weeds. A farm. He crept closer, his wary eyes scanning for signs of life. There were none. The farmhouse sagged under the weight of years. Windows were broken. The barn leaned like it was tired of standing. But it was empty, and empty to Evan meant safe. He slipped inside the barn, the smell of old hay and dust filling his lungs. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't warm. But for the first time in a long time, no one was yelling at him. No one was raising a hand. Evan curled up in a corner, pulling his hoodie tight around his thin frame. The rain drummed on the roof, steady and loud, but somehow comforting. His eyes slowly closed. And in that forgotten barn, on a forgotten farm, a lonely, resilient boy finally let himself believe he might have found a place to hide, and maybe, just maybe, a place to begin again. Morning light slipped through the broken boards of the barn in thin golden stripes, warming Evan Carter's face. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the ache in his back from sleeping on the hard dirt floor reminded him. He was still here, still free. Outside, the rain had washed the air clean. Everything smelled fresh and earthy, like wet leaves and pine needles. Birds were already awake, their songs filling the quiet in a way Evan had never heard before. At the orphanage, mornings always came with shouting and slamming doors. Here the day arrived gently. Evan stepped out of the barn and stared across the land. The farm looked worse in daylight. Tall weeds swallowed the fields, some reaching up to his chest. The farmhouse sagged like it was holding up a lifetime of regret. Paint peeled off in wide, flaky strips. The porch boards were warped and broken, and vines crawled up the walls like the house was being slowly taken back by nature. But even in all that decay, Evan felt something strange in his chest. Possibility. He walked slowly, careful, like a curious animal exploring a new territory. His eyes, sharp and observant from years of watching for danger, took everything in. There were rusted tools scattered around, an old chicken coop that had collapsed on one side, and fences so bent they barely stood. Then he saw it. Behind the barn, almost hidden by thick blackberry bushes and tall grass, sat an old tractor. It was green once. Now it was the color of tired moss and rust. Its tires were flat and vines wrapped around its frame like they were trying to claim it. To anyone else, it was just junk. To Evan, it looked like opportunity. He climbed over the brush, his hands getting scratched by thorns as he pushed his way closer. The tractor felt heavy and stubborn, like it had stories to tell, but no one left to listen. Evan wiped dirt off the hood and leaned closer, studying it with careful, determined eyes. He didn't know much about machines, but he knew this. Anything left behind like this might still hold something useful. Food, tools, something he could trade. He tried the door, it creaked open. Inside, the seat was dusty and cracked, but something about it looked off, slightly tilted, not quite right. Evan frowned, his curious mind kicking into gear. He tugged at the seat. It didn't move at first. Then with a stubborn pull, it lifted just a little. His heart skipped. Beneath the seat was a hidden compartment. "What?" he whispered to himself. Evan's hands trembled as he pried it open further. Inside sat a small metal box, old and dented, but solid. It was heavier than it looked. He dragged it out and sat down in the grass, his pulse racing. For a boy who had spent his whole life being told he was worth nothing, holding something that felt important was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. Evan opened the box, and everything changed. Inside were stacks of cash bundled with old rubber bands. Beneath them were yellowed papers and a worn leather notebook. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen that much money in his life. Not even close. His brave, battered heart pounded as 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind. This could buy food, clothes, a bus ticket far away from the orphanage, a new life. But as he picked up the notebook and saw the name written on the first page, Henry Whitlock, Evan realized this wasn't just money. It was someone's story, and somehow it had found its way into his hands. Evan sat in the tall grass behind the barn, the metal box resting on his knees like it might disappear if he let go. The wind moved through the weeds, making them whisper, but all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Money, so much money. He counted it once, then again, then a third time, just to be sure he wasn't dreaming. $9,600. For a kid who used to get excited over a couple of quarters left on a table, this felt unreal. His hands shook as he held the crisp bills. They smelled faintly of oil and old paper, like they had been waiting a long time to be found. Evan swallowed hard. This could change everything. He imagined himself riding a Greyhound bus to somewhere warm, somewhere nobody knew his name. He could buy burgers instead of stealing day-old bread, a real bed instead of cold dirt, new clothes instead of hand-me-downs that never fit. No more running, no more hiding. His hopeful, desperate heart started to build a future in his mind. Then he opened the notebook. The pages were filled with careful, slanted handwriting. The first line read, "My name is Henry Whitlock. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone." Evan's chest tightened as he kept reading. Henry wrote about the farm, about waking up before sunrise, about loving the land even when it was hard. He wrote about his wife, Margaret, and how her memory slowly faded from Alzheimer's, even though his love for her never did. And then he wrote about his kids, Sarah, Mark, Lily. Henry was proud of them. He missed them. He wished he had said it out loud more often. He regretted letting silence grow where love should have been spoken. Tears blurred Evan's vision as he turned the pages. This wasn't just some old man's diary. This was a heart laid open. Near the back, Henry explained the money. He didn't trust banks anymore, not after losing everything once, so he hid his savings inside the tractor. It was meant to be a safety net for his family, something to leave behind in case life fell apart. And then in shaky letters he wrote, "If someone finds this, please don't let it go to waste. And if you can, please find my children. Tell them I love them. I just didn't know how to say it." Evan closed the notebook slowly. The money felt heavier now. This wasn't a lucky break. It was someone else's last gift. But still, he looked down at his thin arms, his scraped hands, his worn-out shoes. He thought about the orphanage, the yelling, the bruises, the way nobody had ever fought for him. Life had never been fair to him. So why should he be fair now? The lonely, wounded part of his heart whispered, "Take it, just this once. You deserve something good." No one would ever know. But another voice, quieter, steadier, rose up inside him. His grandmother used to say something before she died. Evan barely remembered her face, but he remembered her words. "Who you are is what you do when nobody's watching." Evan pressed the notebook to his chest. If he took this money, he might escape his pain, but he'd become someone he didn't want to be. A thief, a liar, just another person who took instead of did right. The brave, stubborn part of him, the part that had survived everything, made its decision. "I'll find them," he whispered into the empty field. Even if it cost him everything, even if it meant staying cold and hungry, because some things were worth more than money, and Evan Carter was about to prove it. The tiny public library in Meadowbrook smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. It was the kind of place where time moved slowly and everyone spoke in soft voices. Evan sat at one of the two computers, his worn backpack at his feet. the metal box hidden deep inside it like a secret that could burn him if anyone found out. His nervous, determined eyes scanned the screen as he typed the names over and over. Sarah Whitlock, Chicago. Mark Whitlock, California. Lily Whitlock, New York. Too many results. Too many strangers. His hopeful heart sank every time a lead turned into nothing. Evan rubbed his tired eyes. He had been there all day, skipping lunch again to save what little money he had. Just when he was about to give up, a gentle voice spoke behind him. "Sweetie, you look like you're searching for something important." It was Mrs. Harper, the librarian, a kind woman with soft gray hair and warm eyes. Evan hesitated. Trust didn't come easy to him, but something in her voice felt safe. I, I'm trying to find a family," he said quietly. "The Whitlocks. They used to own a farm outside of town." Her face softened with recognition. "Oh, Henry Whitlock's kids?" Evan's heart jumped. "You know them?" She nodded. "Sarah used to work at the bank here before she moved to Chicago. Let me see what I can find." Within an hour, Mrs. Harper had done what Evan couldn't. She pulled an old file from county records and found a forwarding address, a phone number. Evan stared at the slip of paper like it was a bridge to another world. His anxious, courageous hands shook as he picked up the phone in the corner of the library. "Hello," a woman's voice answered. Hi," Evan said, his voice small but steady. "Is this Sarah Whitlock?" "Yes, it is. My name is Evan. I'm calling about your dad, about his farm." There was a long pause. "His farm?" Sarah repeated, suddenly alert. "Why?" I found something that belongs to your family," Evan said. "Something important." He told her about the tractor, about the hidden box, about the money in the notebook. On the other end of the line, Sarah started crying. "My dad, he left us something," she whispered. "We thought he lost everything." Over the next few days, Evan called Mark and Lily too. Each conversation was different, but everyone carried the same mix of shock, grief, and unfinished love. 2 weeks later, 3 cars pulled up to the forgotten farm. Evan stood near the barn, his brave but terrified heart pounding. Sarah stepped out first, tall and professional, followed by Mark, who had kind eyes and a tired smile. Lily came last, already wiping tears from her cheeks. They looked at the overgrown land, at the broken house, at the barn. "This was home," Lily whispered. Evan brought out the box and the notebook. They gathered around as he opened it. Sarah read aloud from her father's journal. His words filled the air, telling them what he never had the chance to say. "I was always proud of you. I loved you more than this land." They cried together, right there in the dirt and weeds. Mark looked at Evan, his eyes filled with something like awe. "You could have kept all this," he said softly. "Why didn't you?" Evan swallowed. "Because it wasn't mine, and because I didn't want to be the kind of person who takes what doesn't belong to them." Silence fell between them. Then Sarah knelt in front of Evan and gently hugged him. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave us our dad back." And for the first time in his life, Evan felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. The old farm didn't change overnight, but something inside it did. After Sarah, Mark, and Lily came back into their father's life through the journal and the money Evan had returned, the land no longer felt forgotten. It felt remembered. They stayed for several days, walking the fields, sitting on the broken porch, reading their father's words out loud like he was still there with them. And through it all, they kept glancing at Evan, the quiet, brave boy who had done what no one else would. "You don't have to sleep in the barn anymore," Sarah finally told him one evening. Her voice was gentle but firm. "There's a spare room in the house. It's not perfect, but it's warm." Evan nodded, trying not to cry. Over the next weeks, everything began to shift. Mark, who worked in construction, helped fix the roof. Lily brought groceries and blankets. Sarah handled the paperwork, making calls to child services and a lawyer to make sure Evan would never be sent back to that place again. The farm slowly came back to life. But the biggest change wasn't the land. It was Evan. For the first time, someone asked him what he wanted for breakfast. Someone told him good morning. Someone said, "You did the right thing, and we're proud of you." One afternoon, Sarah knelt beside him in the field where the old tractor still sat. "Evan," she said, "my dad hoped someone would love this place again. He never imagined it would be you, but I think he would have." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a small stack of cash. "It's not payment," she said softly. "It's a thank you and an invitation. You're family now if you want to be." Evan's tender, overwhelmed heart felt like it might burst. The boy who had run away in the rain, afraid and alone, now had something he'd never known before. A home, a future, a family. So let me ask you something. If you were in Evan's place, cold, hungry, with no one to protect you, and you found $9,600 hidden in an old tractor, would you have kept it? Would you choose what was easy or what was right? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that honesty still matters, and that even the smallest person can make the biggest difference, please hit the subscribe button. This channel is about real choices, second chances, and the courage to do what's right when no one is watching. Because sometime, the choice you make in the darkest moment can lead you straight into the light.